All right, well, welcome back to Water Awareness 2020. I am here today with Dr. Brad Elder. He is a professor at Doane University in Nebraska. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, your background, what you teach?
So I do a lot of weird things. I'm actually a fire ecologist, so I study how plants and animals respond to prairie fire. So I teach ecology here, but then as part of that, I've expanded out to looking at conservation, and that's led to a lot of my work in Africa, designing mosquito nets for homes, things like that.
Right, okay, nice, cool. Thank you so much. So to get started, I think I would like to hear a little bit more about we all know that we need water to survive.
Mhm.
But I don't know that a lot of us could explain like why or what happens to the body or like what, like why water is so important. So if you could explain like the biological side, like how long can we survive and what really starts happening. Um,
Well, so running out of water is bad. So life as we know it, as we understand it, needs water. So when we look at other planets and look for life, we look for planets with water because it's how it's the only real good view that we have about how life would work. And water, sort of the universal solvent. So everything in your body is moving essentially through water. As you become dehydrated, your body's ability to do lots of things starts breaking down pretty quickly. And one of the things that can happen, and this is interesting because as a firefighter, I've done this before, where you get so dehydrated that you know what you want to say, but what actually comes out is something different. And when I said it at the time, I didn't know. I knew in my head, I was trying to describe on a camera that I attached to my helmet what the fire was doing and why it was doing what it was doing. And in that process, you can actually find this online. Um, I said the fire is about 6 miles an hour high because I wanted to describe the height of the grass,
right.
and then about this fast.
Yeah,
So it
right.
made no
It
sense
was
at all.
flopping, right.
Um, and I knew what I was trying to say, and it wasn't until later, and I was frustrated with not being able to speak clearly in my head, but I was like, whatever, I'll keep going, because you mess things up. But it wasn't until later that I was watching the video that I realized that I knew in my head exactly what I wanted to say, but my brain couldn't send that to the other side of my brain to make my mouth say what it wanted to say.
Right, and your
So
body connect to describe how high and right.
right. So there's all these weird things that start happening long before your cells start dying. You'll start cramping up because you can't get rid of waste as easily. Your kidneys can fail. There's lots of things that could end up killing you pretty fast when you run out of water. And it's not at the cellular level in the sense of like this cell fell over dead because it didn't have enough water. It's the system. You're much more complicated. So that system starts breaking down much earlier.
Okay. Right. Yeah, I could, yeah, like I said, like everybody knows like, oh, you need water, you can't go very long without it. But then, like, well, what really does that mean? What starts happening?
Right.
So that's good to hear. I also want to talk about sanitation, and you're an EMT as well, and
Mm-hmm.
so you might be able to speak a little bit, but like what is the importance of how does water like affect proper sanitation? Um, yeah.
Well, so sanitation and water are kind of two different things, and kind of really tied together. This actually has nothing to do with being an EMT.
Oh,
Um,
well,
so I mean, so my job as an EMT is to get you out of the car, out of the house, off the yard, whatever, into an ambulance safely and keep you alive to get you to the hospital. Now, sanitation's involved in that, but
right.
it's not really kind of what you and I are thinking about in terms of what it means to have uh, a sanitary home or a sanitary environment. So if like one of the things that happens, particularly when you're traveling in developing countries, you may be drinking river water or you may be drinking out of a ditch. And actually, I have some pictures. I should
Right.
have loaded those up to show you where we got our water sometimes. Once you get something in your system that gives you dysentery and then you're just sick and you have diarrhea, you're dehydrating really, really fast. You can
Right.
actually die from diarrhea. In fact, I think it is still one of the major causes of death around the world is just diarrhea. If the only thing I have to rehydrate you is dirty water, then you're never getting cured. You're just going to die.
Going down
Um,
faster.
so that's a problem. And then when we think about it, people lose sight of what that really means because what it means to a family, if you have someone working, let's say in Kenya, in some of the villages I've worked in, there's not a lot of jobs. And let's say you manage to get this job and you're driving one of the matatus, one of the local buses, and you get sick and get diarrhea just for a couple of days. That owner has hundreds of other people to choose from to be drivers. So he or she doesn't have to wait for you to recover, hire
Right.
someone else. Now your family that was crawling out of that hole is immediately shoved back in. So dying's awful, and it's a terrible thing to have happen, particularly from diarrhea, or just lack of clean water. But the real bigger impact is the whole economy of Kenya is crushed down by so many people getting sick just from non-clean water, just
Mm-hmm.
from lack of having clean water in that sense. In the terms of sanitation, if you're trying to clean your house, do your laundry, do other things with dirty water, then everything's always dirty. Like you're never getting away from it.
Clean.
You're never really getting clean, right? So it's a problem. It's a strange problem when you look at those two, because access to clean water changes your health and improves your health. But if you can't even clean your house, it's even worse. So if I gave you all really good cleaning supplies and just fed you bad water, the health of your country or your village or whatever would go down. But if I took away those cleaning supplies and only let you clean with dirty water, it would go even lower, right? So we have both of these things driving this. And you can see this actually when you think of just healthcare, access to healthcare. So the U.S. healthcare system is now one of the worst, if not the worst, in the developed countries. And you can see that effect on people's health when they get COVID. So we have different groups of people getting COVID, and if you have money, then you tend to do better than if you don't have money.
Right.
And you aren't dying. COVID's not like checking your bank account like, hey, this one's dying, or this one's getting sick.
Right.
You didn't have access to healthcare for years. Your body has problems already. Maybe you have diabetes undiagnosed, maybe you have asthma, all these other things, but you can't afford it. So all those things go undiagnosed and being harder on your system. Now you get COVID coming in and hammering it. And that's marginal compared to the effect of contaminated water and having to drink that. So
Right.
it's
It
an
goes back to
interesting
like
thing.
resources and like what you have access to.
Right. Yeah, and you
Water,
can actually see it. In fact, when you look at human growth and human explosion, the two things that really started this growing, there's a couple things in there, but access to clean water meant you live longer. It was like at
Right.
one point you were more likely to die going to the hospital than you were staying home, because healthcare just hadn't gotten good enough. Like President Washington died, he had pneumonia, but we stuck a needle in his neck and let blood out because we thought, well, he has too much blood, let's drain the blood out of him. That's what our healthcare system was.
Right.
So I think that crossover point's like 1930, something like that. So it's fairly recent. Clean water allowed you to live longer. Now in the United States, it's healthcare, because most people in the United States have access to fairly clean water compared to developing countries.
Right. You've heard how like our toilet water is cleaner than some of the water than.
Oh yeah, yeah, by far.
Yeah.
My first time in Kenya, I'd woken up early and I was out on safari with just a group of people kind of all connected, and we're staying in a camp. And I got up and I brushed my teeth in the morning and I walked up on this little ridge, just looking down over the camp. So I'm up here and looking down, and one of the guys comes out and grabs that jug off a tree, is hanging on a tree. And the Maasai had just walked 100 cattle right through our campsite, right through this little river. And he walks over, dunks that, fills it back over the river water, and hangs it back up. And it's full. It looks like a farm field, right?
Right.
And I'm like, oh, so this is how I get some internal parasite. And I was like, well, I got it. So I spent the rest of the week drinking out of that jug, and I was fine, but some other people got sick.
Yeah, no, I believe it. I feel like I've had a similar experience in Costa Rica.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you just talked about like your experiences in Kenya, and I know you spent a lot of time outside or camping, nature, traveling elsewhere. So is there a way to tell if like water is, like boiling water, is that like a sure-proof way?
So if you're in nature and you don't have the lead factory upstream, right, or some other thing dumping stuff into the river, then boiling is fine. 99% of the time, boiling's gonna work. Now, here's the problem. boiling cuts down trees, right? So you can actually look at a map of Africa right now, and you can see Lake Victoria. And so Lake Victoria is right here on the jungle side. The trees used to all come up to the edge. We changed some fish in here because people are idiots, but they had to start cutting down trees to cook these fish. And the trees are about 200 miles now away from the lake because they've cut all those down just to cook food, right? That's not boiling water, which takes even more energy. It takes a lot more energy to boil water than it does to cook a fish. So boiling water works, but it is it's difficult to come up with another way to kick Mother Nature as hard as you do in the shins than boiling water, and try to do it, in a nice way, like you could dump lead and that would work. But like, I'll just boil water and make myself healthy. You're really, really harming nature. So it's true, boiling water works. It's expensive, and most families can't afford it. I mean, that's what it comes down to. You just simply can't afford to boil water.
So do families just kind of gamble, or like take the risk or do they, is there like a local method that they all use? I mean, I guess it probably depends on where you
just drink out of the ditch. You just drink out of the ditch
and hope for the best.
I'll send you some pictures that I can show you of where we got our water in one of the villages I lived in. And there's just a little boy trying to submerge a 1 gallon. It was an oil jug for Crisco or something like that, corn oil. And so it's about this thick, and it's just a block, and it's got a hole right in the middle. So when you turn on its side, the hole's halfway up. And he's trying to push it far enough down in the ditch to get water to go in. That's how shallow this water is. And it's 200 feet, and it's coming out of a seep in the ground further uphill, but where it's seeping, it's kind of going underground and kind of coming above and kind of coming down. It's not until it hits the ditch next to the road that it actually builds up with water. And that's what we're drinking out of. That's what the cattle are drinking out of. The goats are all drinking out of. Anything that comes by at night is drinking out of it. There's no filter. And then if you wanted to go for a little bit better water that's standing in a pond, that was about a 1.5 mile walk. And so, so the ladies would put on the headband, just a headband onto a bucket, and then walk, fill it up, and come back with 5 gallons at a time. Which means then you almost never take showers, because that's a ton of water that you just wasted, right? That you use to clean yourself. And if everyone stinks, and I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you end up camping for more than a week or 2 weeks with no one taking showers, it's something the Western world's not used to. Everyone stinks, but you don't notice it. I mean,
I can see
it's not there at all. As soon as you stand next to someone that's clean, you're like, oh, I stink bad, right? I mean, it's really, really obvious. So if what you're thinking about is, well, I want to smell better, or eat, or drink, or then cleaning.
You kind of choose, which one is most important.
Right. So that means then you are carrying with you a lot more than you are in the United States or in the Western world, a lot more disease outside your body. Now, you may not be infected, but it has places to hide on you. So it's an interesting problem.
Yeah, for sure. Now, another question, you touched base earlier about earlier was clean water, now it's healthcare. So do you think, or maybe the best, how has clean water helped with public health and healthcare?
It is the biggest thing. If you go back and you look at human population growth, human population is going, and then there's this little funny bump, and then it just curves up. There's another little bump in here. And so this first bump is domestication of crop. So at this point, there's enough food, because we're farming now and not hunting and gathering. We can store food when nature's bad. We still have extra stores in the grain, storage bin, so we can start surviving. So human population jumped up a significant, you can see it, it's a significant bump. Then there's another bump, and this is domestication of the ox and the yoke, which allows an ox to pull and plow. From there on out, this curve is almost unshifted. And the only thing that's happened on this, other than we get more and more people, the only thing that's really sped it up is clean water. So nothing determines your ability, and probably still in the world, it's probably the number one determination of whether or not you're going to live to an old age, is whether or not you have access to clean water. And that is directly correlated to money. It's just money. So the richer you are, the more likely you're going to live. to old age. So, or to an older age. So right now, I think the United States, we die about 4 to 5 years sooner than everyone else in the Western world or in developed countries because their healthcare system is so jacked, and the
Right,
way
not
we
as
treat it,
great.
yeah, the way we treat workers is insane. But we live a lot longer than anybody in a developed country, and it's just clean access to clean water.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and that makes sense. I think I read something once. It was like every 21 seconds, a child dies of a water-related disease. So
Yeah,
clean
so
water definitely has an effect on that.
yeah, when you look at these numbers, and I know back, God, I want to say it was in the 80s, the last time I really got into looking at them, because people throw these numbers around all the time, like,
Right, and
oh,
they
more
change
people
all the
dying of AIDS,
time.
whatever,
Right.
yeah. I still think the number one cause of death in the world is diarrhea, and it's for babies. And you think, like, the amount of water someone my size loses when I have diarrhea is enormous, but it's not that big relative to my body size. To
Hmm.
a baby, it's an enormous amount of water.
Right.
So that baby can die overnight while you're just trying to get more water into it. And if it's fussy and crying and didn't want to drink, it dies.
Right.
That's the story across the world. So it is a huge problem. It's just fresh water. It's all it is, fresh water.
Hmm. I think I have one last question for you,
Yeah.
or at least one last written question. We can keep talking. But we just had this huge global pandemic.
Uh-huh.
And how could access to clean water have helped with that? Could it have prevented much, or did it really mostly affect the Western world, do you think, in your opinion?
No. So there's a couple of things that are going on in this whole dynamic. So this pandemic just spreads by breathing, and I think when we first tried to start shutting down travel to China, within that first day or first week, there was something like 4,000 people had traveled between the U.S. and China. That's true everywhere. Like, I mean, it's a little weird for China because they have a bigger population, but that's true everywhere. I mean, people are traveling back and forth from Kenya from Zambia, all these different places. So the virus is making its way around. If your healthcare is lower, then the impact of that virus is going to be even harder. And we see that clearly in the United States. That is a 100% chance that's happening everywhere else around the world. Right now, we are so wrapped up, particularly in the United States, with the chaos that's going on with our government, with the chaos of the virus, with I hope the reckoning coming with Black Lives Matter. All of that is narrowing our view, particularly in the United States, about what's going on elsewhere. If the United States wasn't being impacted by this, then you'd be hearing about it. You'd be hearing about all the people dying in different places.
Right.
Throughout Latin America, I mean, it's just a wave of death. I mean, people are being left in the streets because they've died, and they have no way of burying that individual. And the government's coming by, and sometimes weeks later, to pick up this body because they're so far behind because so many people are dying.
Right.
So it's happening everywhere. If you don't have clean water, your healthcare drops. Just that alone. That means you have lung infections, you have internal infections, you have parasites, you have all these other things. So when you actually get hit by something that you might have survived, you have a higher chance of dying. And we see that in the United States just with the difference in access to healthcare, right? And that's not that big of a difference compared to the rest of the world. If you're the person on the receiving end of no healthcare, it's a big difference. But compared to the rest of the world, in Kenya, the difference between our healthcare high and low isn't that much. But we can see it in the data. We can see these people dying preferentially with COVID. So it's got to be going on around the world, and clean water would change that. I mean, it would just change that. So it's got to have a huge effect.
I have another question, which is it's on topic, but kind of off topic. Talking about other countries, I sound like a self-absorbed American here, but I guess I hadn't really thought. I mean, I definitely have considered it, but we're supposed to get a vaccine in the next 12 to 24 months, hopefully. That vaccine probably won't be available in developing countries, or
it depends on how we design the vaccine. My guess is it won't be available to everybody in the United States. So even right now, for most of the United States, you don't have access to going to get a test to see if you were exposed to COVID.
Right.
I was just recently exposed, I just told you, and I called up the testing center, and I'm a firefighter, and said, I'm a firefighter who's just exposed. They bumped me to the front of the line because I need to know so I can go back out and start saving lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can do it immediately. My wife, who's the one who exposed me, had to twist the arm of her doctor before the doctor finally relented and said, okay, I'll let you get the test, which
Mm-hmm.
is insane. So we can't even do the tests. So
Right.
when virus comes when the vaccine comes out, it'll be a bigger problem because the number of people being tested is this much. There's this many people in the United States.
Right.
There's, I mean, that
How
many
many
people in the
people in the
world.
world?
So in the villages that I've worked in, no running water, no electricity, where I just sleep on straw. No one in that village is going to see a vaccine for 2 more years, 3 more years. I mean, it depends on the world's willingness to put money behind
To
it, ramp
share.
that, yeah, and
Right.
start doing it. And we talk about it like often people throw this thing. Well, that's a Western problem. Like, my cell phone doesn't work. Blah blah blah. The rest of the world relies on their cell phones too, and when their cell phones don't work, they're just as mad. So it's
Right.
really
Yeah.
it,
To hear
it's
this, like,
shocking.
oh,
It's just
yeah.
something you don't think about, but you're sitting in a village in the middle of nowhere. There's no electricity, no running water. Everyone charges their cell phones with solar, and you can see the towers, miles away, and they're just going off. Why does Samsung do this? Blah, blah, blah.
Right. Same things that we do.
Right, same things ever. So it's when you look at this, everyone gets. It's just human nature. We get self-absorbed in our own world, and I think you can see this clearly with the Black Lives Matter movement. And women's rights and minority rights, it goes up and then dies down and goes up and dies down, and we all are stuck in our own world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as soon as the vaccine comes out, the bulk of humans, not just Americans, bulk of humans will get their vaccine and try to start recovering their life, because so many are out of jobs and are losing their apartments, all these other things.
Right.
They don't have the time or patience to worry about someone in a remote village somewhere in Zambia. So it's going to take a lot of effort on everybody's part to make that happen. But you can think about it. If the vaccine is found, we can list the countries who are going to get it first, and we can probably make a pretty good guess at the countries who are going to be in the last quarter of the group of people who finally get that vaccine.
Right.
So it'll depend on the makers and how they do it.
Yeah, I agree with. I've seen that. I've been scared, like, oh, the vaccine's gonna come, but who's gonna get it first? Because probably
Right.
not everybody in the U.S. is gonna be. We're not gonna be able to make it fast enough to get it for everybody in
Right.
the U.S. or everybody in the world.
Right.
So yeah,
And
but
I
I
mean,
think
and it's sort of the nature of physics. Like, so when we first invented penicillin and made the first extract that we could inject into someone, the person we injected it into happened to be a police officer who had cut his finger gardening, and so he had a blood infection. He's in the hospital. He had a blood infection just from this thorn, this thorn, and he had an infection now in his blood. He's going to die. And they're like, well, if he's going to die, let's inject him with this
let's try.
fungus extract and hope. And he
Yeah.
started recovering, but he was too big for the amount they gave him. And so he started to recover and then collapsed and went right back a couple days later and died because they didn't have any more. So the next one they tried on a boy, and it was a little small boy, and he lived. And that was the first person to survive using penicillin on the second trial. So you can imagine how long did it take to start extracting penicillin from the fungus on a scale big enough to actually hand out
To help
these,
yeah.
like, yeah, millions and millions of people died from the day they tried it on the little boy to the point where it became actually everyone had more or less had access, certainly in the Western world, and then it became useless because bacteria adapted to it. So we should see that same thing here, and it's not diabolical, it's just physics. It's just,
Right. It's just what's
yeah, how do we do this?
possible. Right.
Right. But then the number one thing that determines whether you live to old age is money. And that buys access to healthcare, buys access to
Everything. Really.
vaccines. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that is all the questions I have. Is there anything you would like to interject, share?
It's, I think a lot of people struggle with causes like this. And Jane Goodall came and gave a talk, and one of my students asked, what should I do if I want to make a difference and save the world? And her response was amazing. She's like, do what you're passionate about. You've got to wake up in the morning and want to do it, because it's not going to work. You're going to try it, and it's going to fail, and you're going to try it, and it's going to fail, and you just got to keep going I think you and I talked about it. Chances are you're not going to save the world, but
Right.
you have the ability to push that ball a little bit further. And if we all are working on that, we can start moving that in a direction. So really what I'd say to your listeners is if clean water is your passion, then run with it. If you have another passion, run with that, because there are going to be bad days where
Right.
things
No, for
just didn't
sure.
work out and you're going to have to get up and do it again. So that'd be
Yeah,
my
I
recommendation.
agree with that. Like, there's that one quote that's like, you can change you can't change the world, but
Right.
you can change one person's world, you
Right.
know, that in a similar kind of concept,
Same
similar
thing. Yeah.
theory. Um, but yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much
Surely, surely.
for chatting today and answering my questions. Um, we will be in contact soon. But
Okay.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.